Hello and welcome to Plants and Wellbeing, a practical guide and insights. I am Heather Kelland, one of the organisers of KinderLeeds, organising some of the events for Kinder to Self. Today I'm joined by Jamie Westcott, urban gardener. Welcome, Jamie. If you would
Hi,
like
Heather.
to describe what you do.
Yeah, I'm an urban gardener. I've gardened in central London for the last 15 years. I manage people, I manage plants, and I just try to connect them back to nature. Um, it's all about engagement for me. It's about teaching the passerby and taking the time to talk to the passerby if they have
Mhm.
questions and let them know the why we do, not just the what we do, which I think is really important.
Yeah, totally. Um, So, to start with, can you talk a little bit about what you think the relationship is between plants and emotional health?
I think it's huge. I think it's untapped, and I think it's I think it's super important. You can you're inviting a living thing into your home that you get to watch grow. You get to look after it. It flowers for you. It shows you that it's happy. It tells you when it needs water, when it's unhappy. It adds texture and movement to a space. It can help soften a dark corner that has a bad memory. Like, oh, I just and put a plant there, and all of a sudden it's a really cool space, and you can stick a lamp behind it and uplight it in the evening, and it casts all the textured shadows on the wall, and it can be a really magical thing. I know for me, I went from having 4 houseplants to about 70 houseplants, and when I take them outside to water them, and I go back inside and I look at the space without the plant, and I just think it looks dreary
Mm,
and drab. And I stick the plant back in that space, and I smile again. So for me, I mean, that tells me kind of everything I need to know is I enjoy caring for them. I really prefer having them than to not having them,
mhm.
and it puts me in a great mood when I walk around the flat and see all this life in the place. It's wonderful.
Wonderful. So how do you feel like plants can change a space and affect a space in your home and in other areas?
I, I think it's all about. So you can look at plants like redecoration.
Mhm.
Like, do you want to paint your walls or you want to buy a plant? I'd rather buy a plant. And you can do a mixture of plants because it's not just the plant; it's the pot. It's what am I going to put it in? What am I going to put it next to? And it really gets you excited about a space that might have just been the refrigerator. I've
Yeah.
got 5 different plants on top of my refrigerator, and some of them trail down the side, and some of them just hang out in the corner, and one of them pops up on the top, and then all of a sudden it's not this bright white box anymore. It's alive. Um, so by softening harsh spaces and adding to bland spaces, they can be a completely transformative addition to any space for me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me really want to put plants on my refrigerator because at the minute I just have like a pizza menu and my shopping list,
Yeah,
and that certainly
yeah.
doesn't bring me any joy.
No, no. And I remember when the first time I took them all off and brought them outside because it's a super dark corner. So whenever I can, I'll bring them outside, give them a few hours of natural sunlight. And I went back inside and I was just like, this is terrible. It was just so harsh on my eyes to see
Mm.
this big naked white box and a lamp just on top of it. And a few hours later, I put the plants back and I was looking at that space eating dinner and I thought, this is really nice. So yeah, I just think it is massive. If you love plants and you care about plants and you want that connection with nature around you as much as possible, houseplants are the way to go for sure.
Definitely. So, what are some good easy care indoor plants?
So there is a million. I'm going to consult my notes. I mean, I do say ask the internet this question because it's really fun to start clicking on images and researching plants. Then all of a sudden, you've got, like, I have a list of about 30 different plants that I want to bring into my home. So it's and it can also tell you what you don't want. Doing a nice proper search on your own time with a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and it's really great. But I mean, shade tolerant plants, I think you want to look at an aspidistra, which is also called a cast iron plant. That pretty much tells you that it's nearly unkillable. The peace lily can handle shade. It just doesn't like to get dried out too much. And that'll give you nice little white flowers throughout most of the year. There you go. Dracaena for some funky texture. They've got a lot of elongated, kind of spiky leaves. They're soft, and some of them are variegated. So you can get red tinges and creamy tinges, which is nice. Peperomia, which is a much smaller little plant that almost looks like a succulent. And you can have them look like little watermelons, or they can just be these tight little red fingers creeping up. It's a really neat plant. Philodendrons and epipremnums for trailing plants coming down. Also planted up my mantelpiece. I've just got it all trailing kind of down on both sides. It just looks, it's really cool. And that's all really shady plants. I've got those, every single one of those in my flat in the shadiest room. And if shade isn't really an issue, aloes and tradescantias, nice purple trailing plants, and spider plants, strelitzias, the bird of paradise is a really cool plant. Just stick it in a sunny window, water it once a week, and the foliage almost looks like banana leaves. So even when it's not flowering, it looks like you've got a dwarf banana in your flat. It's such a cool plant. And monsteras, they're really fashionable now, and they've got funky leaves.
Like this one, right?
There you go. And there, you can put them in a shady corner and give them indirect light. As long as it's not dark, they'll grow. And sometimes having plants in a shadier spot helps contain how much they grow, so you can kind of have them in your space for longer. For me, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but it's very important that all my plants have the ability to suffer, because I have so many inside and so many outside, and the dog, and a full-time job. I need to know how much time I have to look after these plants. So if I want more plants than I have time to look after, they unfortunately need to suffer a bit. But that's also a big part of the well-being aspect is knowing the time you have to look after what you have, because you don't want to go and buy 40 plants and then realize you've only got time to look after 10, because that's going to be such a negative effect. So I say start small, buy 3, then buy another 2, and then get another maybe 5. But you want to make sure that you can look after what you've got before you start adding.
I know with myself, I got given this plant by my mom, the peace lily, when I first moved into this flat. And straight away I wanted to get more plants because I really, I felt really positive about having this. But I thought, right, if I can make this plant live for a few weeks, then maybe I can get another plant. And then every few weeks, if all my plants are doing well, then I'll get another one. But then if they start to do not so well, I'm like, okay, this is my limit.
And then, but look at the smile on your face when you were saying, and then another few weeks, I'll get another one, and then I get another one. So it brings this joy of how much more joy can I bring. And then that's the thing, is that once you can look after a house plant, and once you realize the benefit of that plant, even an outdoor plant on your patio or on your deck or wherever you want to sit and relax, I can get more joy just by bringing in another plant. And it's such a simple connection to this moment of happy and effectively peacefulness, which happiness and peacefulness, for me personally, and in my own mental health, struggles and battles and victories have been the 2 most important things, and the 2 things that I was always worried, am I going to get there? And it's the same with plants. They bring you peace, they bring you happiness, and that's the goal, right? For everyone. So yeah, I think the connection is massive and underrated, and there's so much more that we can explore with this.
Definitely. So, we were talking just then about, making sure that you you don't get more than you can care for. One of the most common ways that people maybe struggle with in terms of plant care is working out whether they're underwatering or overwatering their plants. Personally, I accidentally annihilated a bonsai tree by overwatering it because I thought it was underwatered. And then I just watered it more and more until it died. So what are some tips you have for that?
The first 5 years of my gardening career, I probably killed as many plants as I grew, just from trial and error and not understanding water requirements. Certainly for houseplants, the most common way to kill them is overwatering, not underwatering. And the best way is to stick your finger in the pot and see what it feels like. Go a couple knuckles deep, because the top can be a lot more wet or dry than what's underneath of it. And if it's dry, give it water. If it's really wet, don't water it for a few days. And if it still doesn't kind of dry out, stick it outside in the sun for a few hours for an afternoon, and that'll help dry it out. The problem with overwatering is that it create, plants are simply, they have wet feet all the time, and it makes the roots rot. So I say to people, it's kind of imagining wearing wet socks and shoes for a week straight. You're not going to feel good. It's not going to be healthy.
Yeah.
Your feet are just going to start to get mashed up. So it's the same thing, and it can be cured by only planting in pots that have drainage holes and saucers, and you can put a nice little layer of stone or coconut husk or seashells. There's a little company down in Wales that have started taking seashells and creating it for drainage materials in the bottom of pots, top dressing. They put it down on their borders outside that repel slugs and snails. So, so drainage is important. I don't like having pots with holes in them because I don't think the aesthetic is as nice. So it's really important that you pay attention to the plants. The plant itself will tell you as well. The leaves will start to wilt. The color can start to fade. I find color fading more from overwatering and wilting more from underwatering. But it's just important. And it goes back to having the time. That's the thing, because watering your plants it's the most time consuming aspect of care. I think to water everything that I've got inside, it's a good 25 solid minutes of watering. And then to water the outside of my garden, it takes me close to an hour, because everything's in pots, London flat, nothing's really in the ground. So I need to know that, all right, realistically, I need close to 2 hours a week just to keep the plants alive, let alone trim them, wipe the leaves, dust on the inside plants, which is really important because they need to breathe. So if a plant's really dusty, that is also going to affect its health and how it looks. So, but you'll know all of this by taking the time to water, because as you water the plant, you have a look at the general health and you kind of move on and so, but yeah, stick your finger in it. That's the best way for me to know if it's too wet or too dry. And also read the care instruction label that comes with your plants. It'll tell you if they want to be planted in free draining soil, thin soil, heavy loamy soil. I mean, a rule of thumb is that anything that flowers purple wants really junk soil. Free draining doesn't have a lot of water. So yeah, read your tag and take the time to look at your plants.
Okay. And how can you tell if a plant is diseased rather than under or overwatered?
That starts to come with discoloration on the leaves. Leaves will start to turn a really bright or garish yellow. You'll get black or yellow spots on your leaves. When new buds start to come up, the tips go black, and then the bud will just die and shrivel behind it, that's going to be the sign of a virus or a bacteria or a disease. You can try with your interior plants. You can take the whole plant out of the pot, remove all the soil, take it into the shower, put it in the sink, actually wash all the soil off the roots, and then do a complete replacement. Wash the pot as well to get any sort of junk or bacteria from the inside of the pot. New drainage material, and then replant it with some new soil. Give it a fertilize, and cut off any of the affected leaves, so you know the new leaves coming out will tell you if that's cured the disease or not. But then again, if it hasn't cured the disease and we can't fix it, it's a great excuse to go buy a new plant, or do something different with a corner and completely change it. Going back to that redecorating the area, so it doesn't. Just because a plant's died, we need to remember that it might just be the wrong conditions. It might have just been sick. So, and I think that's really important to remember for the well-being aspect of it. So we don't get depressed, or we don't get down on ourselves if we kill a plant. We kill a plant, we learned. That's the thing about gardening, whether it's inside or outside. It's a constant process of learning. And if we look at it like that, it's almost always going to be a positive thing.
Yeah, definitely. So to talk about a bit more about outdoor planting, can you talk a bit more about how what we choose to plant outdoors can affect us in a positive way, and talk a bit about interaction with an outdoor environment like that?
Definitely. I think planting scented plants is really important in the outdoor space, but I think planting them is almost plants that you interact with accidentally. So planting lavenders, rosemaries, mints, thymes at ankle height, foot height. So you're almost forced to brush against them. The scent just surprises you out of nowhere. And you're like, what? Where did that come from? And it forces you to kind of stop and look around, and then re-engage with your space in a completely different way. Having scented plants at shoulder height, hip height, just forcing you to, and planting them almost in a way. So you're forced to almost walk through a plant to get to where you go. Planting a lavender really close to the end of a border, so the long flower heads are going to touch you and brush against you as you walk past. The scent is such a, it can take you places. You get a whiff of lavender and you're down in Kent or Surrey in the lavender fields. You get a whiff of rosemary, you're on a holiday somewhere, and it can just take you out of your headspace for 10 seconds and bring you to a happy memory. So I think that's really important in how we look at outdoor space and how we want to interact with outdoor space. I think looking at a wildflower meadow can force you to stop and think about anything. You just stop and pause. I was at the Chelsea Physic Garden yesterday with a colleague, and we spent 15 solid minutes marveling at the perfect urban wildflower meadow. And it's just, and I'm sitting there imagining being in the Swiss Alps at the end of summer, looking at the wildflowers going up a mountainside, but I'm in central London looking at a 40 square meter wildflower meadow. They're very powerful. Of course, it also depends entirely on the space. If it's public space, you want to create a space that's engaging. You want to create a space that's fun. What's around the next corner. If it's a serene private space, you want to almost look at it like it's a painting and sit and enjoy it how it is, and then move along. But you have to know your space. You have to know your audience. But most importantly, the people working in the space need to be willing to engage with the public. And I think that's a huge part of our jobs as professionals, is not telling them what we do, it's telling them why we do. I certainly I garden in a chemical-free manner. Over the last couple of years, I've specialized in taking sites that have been traditionally using pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and just stopping that. We can generally get that achieved in about 3 months' time, and we use seaweed fertilizers, and we use good bugs to kill the bad bugs, and we also then re-educate the client on what a weed is as well, which is, I think we'll touch on a little bit later. So, and by engagement, we carry around a little bottle of seaweed fertilizer with us, and people who walk past are like, "What's that?" Like, "That's seaweed." Like, "Seaweed?" And then you can tell them, "Yeah, it's seaweed, and it's natural, and it's not going to put anything junky into the water table." Especially in London, you know, we've got the Thames running right through the middle of the city, so everything that we put on the ground is going to end up in the river and then end up in the sea. So,
and would you say all these like chemical-free ways of gardening are like quite accessible?
I completely believe that. I've worked a complete range of sites, tasks in a complete range of manners during my career, from, you know, let's just get in there and do it as quick as possible with no regard, with big loud hedge cutters, and you know, you're just kind of slashing and burning, to really just, what are we doing here? We don't, the only petrol piece of kit that my teams run is a lawnmower. Our hedge cutters and trimmers and blowers are battery operated, so there's no task where the public can't engage with us. We're not wearing ear defenders, so we're always accessible to clients, to people walking past. We always know our surroundings, which helps us engage more as well, because I think it's also very important for the gardener to be engaged with their surroundings. I think it's easy. For me, I had to tell the client, you need to give me 10% more time. You give me 10% more time and let me re-educate you on what a weed is, and we can do this.
Let's talk a bit about that. So what is classified as a weed, and should we be thinking about them differently?
Thinking about them differently, yes, completely. What is a weed? A weed is simply a plant in a place that you don't want it. That's a weed. I mean, we could talk about invasive, you know, giant hogweed or Himalayan balsam or knotweed, and you know, that's kind of a different thing. But a weed it's just a plant in a spot you don't want that particular plant, for me. And then we need to ask ourselves the question, why don't we want that plant there? And how come we don't want that plant there? I mean, dandelions are a bit of a pest, but if you look at the historical value of dandelions, they were making wine out of those. They were using the greens to eat. I mean, the root was used in medicine and healing. So we can have a few, certainly. And plus, a dandelion is a really good an early food source for ground level insects, because they can munch on the leaves, and it's really high in nutrients. So if we start to encourage these weeds that actually produce flowers, and they aren't invasive, and they can have added benefit as long as they're managed, you know, we do some deadheading and don't let them take over, but there's no reason that they can't be cultivated as a standalone plant. I'm trying to do something in central London where, instead of spraying all these light wells everywhere, I want to start planting the cracks of these light wells with Origeron and Campanula, maybe some creeping thyme. And then all of a sudden we can take what has been sprayed as a barren weed zone and turn it into a little microhabitat for insects and birds and worms. And then we're putting no chemical down, and we don't really need to do anything down there except, you know, pick up the leaves or deal with any self-set stuff that we don't want. And none of that are weeds anymore. It's a garden, right? So it's about perception and engagement. If you can engage with your client and tell them this is what we're going to do, and then when your client gets asked why are there weeds here, the client can say, actually, they're not weeds. We're trying a new scheme, and we're planting, and it's got benefits. And that's how you change people's minds. So again, for me, it goes right back to engagement and communication.
How can people make the most of a balcony if they don't have maybe like a garden, but they do have a tiny little bit of outdoor space?
Plant it. It's as simple as that. It's know your tastes and plant it to that taste. I think that there's no reason every balcony couldn't have a small to medium sized tree on it. There's zero reason why you can't have pots with whether evergreen shrubs or annuals that are sown every year. There's no reason why we can't have vegetables. I mean, if you look at places like Singapore, other places out in Asia, what they're doing on their balconies, they're growing forests on their balconies.
Yeah.
So for me, it's the balcony is a little bit trickier because of wind. You need to buy plants that aren't super sensitive to wind, and you need to really understand what direction you're facing. If you're facing east, don't try to put a tropical plant on your balcony because you're not going to get much sun. Same with facing north. But if you're facing south or west, and you've got kind of a tropical palette in your mind, you can put a banana on your balcony. You can put a palm tree on your balcony. So yeah, I say for that, I think my tip is just take the shackles off your own mind and realize that you can do it. There's no reason not to plant a balcony with anything that you want, as long as you pay attention to light levels and how much wind is ripping around.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting talking about kind of the kind of compass directions as well, because that's something that I wouldn't have considered previously, but suddenly I have friends talking about like south-facing gardens and things, and you know, I wouldn't have realized how much that could affect what you can plant.
Makes a huge difference. My garden faces north, and for instance, I can't grow really tomatoes or peppers or things like that. I just don't get the heat. I've got this big tree in the back, which the one space where I could maybe grow some veg, it's just under that shadow of the tree. So it's a structural garden for me, rather than an edible garden. And you can also do that with LED lights inside. I mean, you can get grow lights and change a dark corner into a sunny corner, and they're little clip-on little LED wands that you can buy for 20 quid. And you can leave those on for a few hours of the day, and your dark corner is all of a sudden a sunny corner, but it's a dark corner. So that knowing your light levels and knowing how you can manipulate those light levels to your benefit is really important to what you can and can't have.
Awesome. I don't think I have any other questions, but is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I mean, I could talk about this stuff for days, but I mean, I've been on a mental health adventure certainly my whole adult life, and I've worked outside most of my life, but I made a switch to this style of horticulture about 2 years ago, where everything we did was considered, and we're not using chemicals, and we're not. Sorry, my dog wants to jump up on his bed, and my notebook was rudely taking his space. But yeah, it's switching to this way of gardening and this way of thinking and this way of engaging with spaces and people. I don't think it's an accident that my mental health is also in the best kind of place it's been as an adult. I don't think it's the whole reason for it, but I definitely think it's a big part of my improvement is how I've decided to engage with plants and engage with how our work affects the bigger picture, and then chosen to try to promote that, and not in an evangelical sense, but if somebody wants to hear about it, me and my boss and my team will take the time to talk to anybody. And I've noticed a change in my team with that after they get done engaging with somebody and they're talking about this positive way that we're doing things, or they're just hedging by hand and they can just put the shears down on the top of the hedge and stop and chat. And I watch them do it, and they always go back to work with a smile on their face. So engaging with plants the right way and not just expecting chemicals to solve your problems, and really taking the time to understand how the environment, and whether that's a top of a fridge or a south-facing garden, can affect the plants. which then affects how they grow, which then affects how we feel. I mean, we just have to stop and breathe a little bit. And I think that's been the one real positive of the COVID situation, is that it's forced us to stop and think and reevaluate. I see the pace of conversation in central London, and the pace of walking in central London has dropped 20-30%. People are taking the time to listen to each other and to be considerate about the tone of our voices and what's coming out of our mouth when we're engaging with strangers.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's all plants, but I'm saying the plants really helped me put that in the headspace to be able to do that. And I certainly find it hugely important for my mental health and for the development of my team's mental health. The way that we're doing things now, it's a real pleasure to be working in horticulture this way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today and for sharing all your insights and, you know, giving me and hopefully everyone else listening like a lot to think about that they might not have considered before. I also feel like you're making us want to all buy hundreds of plants as well. Like, it's even more justified now.
Only if you've got the time to look after them.
Yes, that is true.
So yeah, definitely.
Cool. So, yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.